a selected object. So we've got this cube selected here. I can press camera, follow selected. And now wherever I move this cube, the camera will follow. And so we can do things like change the amount of constraint that the camera is tethered to that object, or we could press focus select. So if I were to press 5 to go into top view, press D to duplicate this cube back here, press S to scale, just duplicate it a couple of times. We've got kind of a generic little background. We're focused and we're tracking in on this cube right here, which is this cube right here. And we've now got this focus value, which if we drop it really low, will make things really blurry. And if we bring it up high, it will bring it more into focus. And then we could, of course, render this. We just whether we are in Blender Render or Cycles. So I'll press go back. We can also quickly adjust the camera lens size from this menu. So by default, it's at 35, but we could either drag it to change it or click on it to change it directly and enter in a value, say like a 20mm lens rather than a 30, and then zoom up on here. So the lower the lens size, this is going to give you more of like a fisheye, kind of more dramatic lens. So it's nice to have access to that. Coding, which combines a bunch of tasks and gives us some more expected results when using these. But the camera itself has all its own properties and a bunch of different things you can change about it. So by default, when we start a new scene, the physical representation of the camera in the 3D view is hidden. Now the view is not hidden. Even with the camera hidden itself, we can still see what the camera sees basically. But here in the 3D view, it's hidden by default, but we can turn the visibility of its representation on and off by pressing this. It's also made automatically visible whenever you use one of these features here, so just so you know that. So if we click on it here, then its properties will show up here in our object properties, the same as any other object. So if we click on any specific kind of object, such as this lamp here, we'll get the lamp options. If we click on a mesh object, such as these cubes here, we'll get constraints, which is similar to the modifier system, with objects. So you've got kind of a similar setup here of what constraints to add. And then this is the actual object properties. So this panel, and press flip to bottom. This would be exactly the same as this. The reason why this panel is dedicated tab, the scene tab, modifiers, whatever, always immediately have access to the object properties as soon as you click on them. And I'll flip this back to the top and close that up. It's especially nice with the outliner over here because you click on whatever object you want to select here in the outliner, and then you immediately have access to its properties right here. It also provides really good space to quickly increase the size of your outliner and make this just take up much more room if you're working with parented. Back to the actual camera properties itself. So we've got this lens menu here, and we have 3 different lens types that we can use. So there's how huge the camera, the representation of the camera in the 3D view gets. Also, we see down here in the actual camera view, the perspective stripped in that orthographic view. So this is basically the same as when we press 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. to go into an orthographic view with our front, back, left, right views. The perspective is stripped. And then you have panoramic, which on the surface it doesn't look very different between the perspective and this. This will set up your camera to be able to take full 360 pictures in combination with some other stuff that we're not going to get into. But you will notice a little immediate difference if I were to say render here. This is the panoramic rendered shot versus if we switch this back to perspective and press render. And then so if we click on the slot and we switch these, you can see how the lens changed that there. I'll press go back. So focal length, that's basically the lens size. So if you're a photography person or you're stuff, and you can see it changing the camera down there, which is cool. That's also just direct control over this lens size value here. You can see the numbers both scaling up and down. So this is just a commonly needed thing, so it's why it's included in our menu down here. And lens shift, if we adjust the shift value on the y-axis, but actually if you'll notice the actual representation of the camera itself, you can see it getting kind of skewed and stretched out. And so this shift value is actually referring to a shifting of the lens. which this is kind of like a new trendy effect used in film 3D where you wear 3D glasses kind of animation stuff, like the shift from two different shots. But that's, you know, a bit beyond this video. But just so you're aware that it's there, I'll reset these to 0. Clipping refers to this little cube here, and then there's these bigger cubes out here. And the clipping starts very close. That means I can get an object nice and close to the camera before it starts cutting away. So if I go ahead and under camera, stop focusing so we can see this a little better. As I move this cube, you can see at some point we start to be inside of the, whereas we can still see the objects back here, which this controls how far away should the camera view things. And I'm also going to press stop following. But anyway, so if we click back on the camera and we increase or decrease this end clipping, so say maybe we drop that down to 500 and then make it even lower, and the camera is actually going to consider, and thus what's actually going to get rendered is controlled with these clipping values. So this is not just for camera views, but the clipping can also be set for your regular 3D view. And this can be helpful if you're working on some kind of mammoth world, or you've just got tons of stuff in your scene and you only want a certain amount of the world to be visible. Under your view settings, you have control of clipping here to control 3D view clipping, just so you're aware you can set those. I'll close that up there. And then under lens, we have actual camera itself. We have a bunch of presets. So you can see name brand camera types here, which you can set up the Blender settings to be as close as to that type of camera as possible if you're trying to emulate some type of camera like this. Then you have sensor size, which this is kind of a weird thing to me to have in a 3D program, because sensor size refers to basically how much light is going to be imprinted on the data cell of a camera. And so this gets very close to being like the focal length. So if we adjust this, it's pretty similar to adjusting the focal length. And I suppose that starts to make sense when you're using complex lighting systems and cycles and stuff in that regard, where light heavy math is used. We'll close that up there. And then under display, these are different things that we can put on the actual camera view itself while we're setting up a shot or trying to figure out how we want things to look in our shot. And that clipping is really bad, so I'm going to lower this a lot. And just put it all the way up as high as it will go on the end clipping there. That's fine. When you're setting up your shot, like you're trying to find, you're basically in photographer mode or you're in director mode, because you're thinking about how you're going to set up your render, basically you taking a picture within this 3D world. So you have different type of composition guides you can put on here. If you're familiar with graphic design, you're probably familiar with some of these different composition types. And these are just ways to help you decide, you know, okay, how am I going to lay out this shot here? Okay, I want content here and split up in that kind of way. And then we can control the 3D representation of the camera. So this size doesn't change how anything renders or looks inside of the camera. This size bit is just for us while we're working in the 3D view, like how big do we want to deal with looking at this little icon that represents the camera. Then this Passepartout, which refers to the darkened area around the actual camera frame border. You can see down here in the camera view, well, if I increase the alpha value here up and down, you can see just around the red dotted lines, in which everything inside of the red dotted lines will be rendered when you render. You can see that getting black and white. So the Passepartout is basically, do you want everything outside of what's going to be rendered to be darkened or not? And you can turn that option off or on and control the alpha value here. If we come down here and press our tilde key or control up to maximize this window, you can see this a bit better around the edges here. So you have other displays. This isn't stuff that changes the way anything renders or anything like that. It's just visual displays. Limits here displays how far away our clipping goes, which is super far away because we set it up as high as it will go. And then mist, which basically we had mist turned on. So if under my lights, I press use mist, and you can see everything getting all misty over there. And I'm going to turn this composition guides off because I don't need them. But this is showing us, hey, your camera is going to see mist from there to there. So if I were to change this mist value, you can see that pointer there getting higher and lower. And also in my little camera view down here, when we change it, we can see how that corresponds. which is useful. Sensor, we talked about camera sensor size. It says show sensor size, film gate in the camera view, but you can't really see it down here. If I press the tilde key, I still can't see it. I'm guessing that this displays farther away. So we always have our camera view available to us down here, but if you want to hop into the active camera in your scene, you can always press 0 on your regular 1 through 9 0 keys at the top left of your keyboard. And yeah, here is the sensor gate here, and then name, which if we turn this on, it's going to display the name of the camera when you're in the camera view, which once again, we can't really see it down here because this window is cropped to just where the camera is going to render, but it'll show that. I'm going to go ahead and turn name and sensor off because I don't need them. Well, actually what's going on down here is that this is a camera view that always displays your scene's active camera, but it has a setting turned on which locks it to your view. So this basically allows you to control the camera view the way you normally control regular movement in the 3D view. So just to rotate, you hold down the middle mouse button. To pan, you hold shift and middle mouse button down. Of course, we all know this by now. And then to zoom in and out, you can scroll up and down or do a precise zoom by holding control and holding down middle mouse and moving your mouse back and up. That's not the case in our default view here, so whenever we press 0, we will hop into what the camera sees here if we want, but as soon as we go to navigate, we're going to jump out of that. So if we want that to move around, we can actually come to view and click lock camera to view, and then this will now do the same thing as is being done down here. So say we have been working and we were just in some random view here, but we're like, I've been working on this thing, but I really would like to render everything just like this, and I don't want to have to come down here and try to navigate, get the camera set up like this. You can force the camera to take on your regular 3D view, basically the inverse of what we just did, by pressing Alt-Control-0. And see, now the camera down here, it put us in the camera view, in our main 3D view, but it also forced our camera view to take on our regular 3D view that we were, working around with, which is nice. So after you press Alt-Control-0, you can immediately click on the middle mouse button, snap out of that, and so still be working on stuff here, but your camera will move to exactly, how you were. If you have a big keyboard with the big square numpad keys to the far right, like the big block of numbers and stuff on a big regular keyboard, if you press the big 0, it will automatically do that for you. It's a special Sensei format convention, so you don't have to press Alt-Control-0 every time you want to do that. So say I wanted to move the camera right here because I was working here, I could just press 0, my big numpad 0, and it would force the camera to take on that view. And then you can navigate away in your regular 3D view and it will stay locked for the camera for when you want to render your scene or whatever. So clicking back on our main camera here, under display we have depth of field. So these values correlate to two things. One, they correlate to the depth of field effects in the 3D view. That's like the live view that gets updated live. And then also if you render, but only if you're in cycles. If you're in Blender render mode, you have to have a special node set up for this to work if you're not using Sensei format. Thankfully, Sensei format users don't have to worry about any of this. This is all calculated automatically, which object will be focused on. You can control the f-stop value through here. For instance, if we were going to click on this cube right here and press camera, focus selected, I'll also press Alt and tap middle mouse button to zoom in on the selected object here. Our focus value, which is basically f-stop value, this lets us get a visual representation of how this is going to look. It will also cause it to render with these effects, and we don't have to set any of this up. It's all done automatically for us, whether you are in Blender Render or Cycles. Okay, and custom properties, this is an option that every object has. It's for more coder stuff. And then you have safe areas, which you can see as soon as I click this on, you see these safe areas show up around the camera. Basically more guide stuff to help you in your composition to make sure that you get everything in your render that you intend to. And then we have different settings we can adjust, the safe area, the action safe area, all that kind of stuff. If you're afraid you're going to not get something in a shot and you need more control or stuff like that. So finally, before we go, up until now we've just been using this single camera, the default Sensei format camera here, which has a little dash before its name. And the point of that is because all these things in the outliner are automatically arranged alphabetically. So the little dash keeps them up in the list first. So it's just a nice, easy way to keep your kind of lamp, camera, kind of those kind of control things up top. But if we were to add another camera, we could either press Shift A or double right click to set the position of our 3D cursor, which will control where whatever we create gets created. And we could add another camera here. So now we have this second camera. So I've just made this new camera here, but if I press G to grab, we notice that it's not changing our camera view, even though we have it selected. Notice these little triangles at the top of these two cameras. If I click off both of them, so they're both black and deselected, notice that one of them is filled up and the other is empty. The filled up one means, hey, I'm the active camera of this scene. I am what things will get rendered through when you press render. And so to change the active camera is real easy. We just come down here to the camera menu, and as soon as your scene has more than one camera, you'll see this option now show up here that says camera. It wasn't there before. So if I wanted to switch the active camera, I click on this menu, select camera, and now we are in the view of this camera. So if I press G to grab and move it around, you see my view changing, or if I come down here and move, you see the camera moving as well. And so this camera doesn't have anything selected to focus on, so we could click an object like this, press camera, focus selected, and so now it will have a way to use this depth of field stuff as well. You can rename these as you can in any object by double clicking it. So I could say call this cam 2. And so I would know here if I was switching between these different cameras. You can see here where I left the safe options on the first camera. So if I click back on that, I could turn the safe area off or on, whatever. This option is also available to change under the Scene tab of your Properties panel. Under Scene, you can control the active camera there, but it's a lot easier just to remember it here because it will show up automatically when there's more than one camera in your scene. Makes it real easy to switch between cameras. Yeah, you can make as many cameras as you want, which is really cool. Give them all kinds of different settings and whatnot. In the future, when we talk about adding markers to our animation timeline, you can actually do something called binding the cameras with the markers. And so like as the animation we're playing, the view would switch from one camera to another, to another, to another if you wanted, and you could have cameras all over the place. So we'll get into talking about that once we cover markers. So that about wraps it up for basic camera stuff. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Until next time.